there's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters this podcast was recorded on. It's early on a February morning in Melbourne in 2005, and Detective Narelle Fraser is responding to reports of a vehicle parked near the city's Shrine of Remembrance. A security guard has called it in after noticing the red Mazda belonging to missing woman Maria Korp. The 50-year-old hasn't been seen for a couple of days now, and as Narelle approaches the car that's been sitting out in the Australian summer heat, she's hit by a pungent smell of death. Her worst fears are confirmed. Inside the car's boot is Maria. There are signs of violence visible on her frail frame, and her body is in a state of decomposition. Narelle's mind immediately starts thinking about the impending murder investigation, but then something unexpected happens. She notices Maria is breathing. I'm Gemma Barth, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In media headlines at the time, Maria's case was nicknamed the Body in the Boot case, a grim and impersonal summation of a horrific crime against a Melbourne mother. It was a crime that captivated the country, a woman left for dead, an affair, a gruesome murder plot, a battle over euthanasia, and a suicide. It was one of those stories that just kept evolving. This February marks 20 years since Maria was found barely alive in the boot of her car. She died a few months later. Narelle Fraser was a detective on the case and was a member of the Victorian Police Force for 27 years. Narelle joins us now. Narelle, can you tell us a bit about who Maria was prior to 2005?
Maria was a 50-year-old mother of 2 children. I know that she was born in Portugal. She was widowed in 1987. She had 1 child in that marriage, and that was Laura. And when I got involved in this case, Laura was a young 20-something, maybe 23, 24. Maria worked in a lingerie, I think it was Kaiser, I think in Campbellfield in Melbourne. She met Joe. They were working together. I'm not sure where, but I know they met at work. In fact, they had an affair. Joe had an affair with Maria. Joe was married at the time to another woman. They had an affair and they got together and they got married. They married in 1991. They had a son, Damien, a couple of years later. I remember how spiritual Maria was, and I am talking seriously spiritual. She had a prayer room in her house that was like a shrine to her former husband, the one that she was widowed to. Her and Joe, I think from Maria's point of view, her and Joe were, very happy. I think she was very surprised when Joe suggested the 2 of them go on a site on the internet to find a threesome, because Joe wanted to spice up their sex life a bit. And I know she was through, interviews, she was very, very hesitant. She felt very uncomfortable about going onto these sites, but Joe wanted to spice up their sex life. And to be honest, it's the worst decision she ever made, because on the other end of the internet was Tanya Herman, who also was looking for a threesome, and the 3 of them got together, and gee, what a surprise, hey? Joe and Tanya fell in love, whatever you want to call it. And that's when it all turned very, very sour. When I talk about a serious spiritual side, we found out during our investigations that Maria had spent something like $150,000 with a spiritual advisor.
Wow.
That's a lot of money, isn't it? Mm.
It definitely was a big part of her life then.
Oh, yeah, huge. Mm.
So Maria obviously knew about Tanya, but did she know that this was a years-long affair? Because it got quite serious between Joe and Tanya, didn't it?
Oh, very. She had no idea. Joe was telling Maria that for work he was required to go interstate, country Victoria. So he would take Tanya on these, well, he wasn't actually going interstate. He was just living or spending a lot of time with Tanya, but she had absolutely no idea. No idea.
When was Maria reported missing? And who by?
By Joe. It's not unusual in a missing person case for the person that knows everything to report somebody missing. Oh, I don't know what's happened. I don't know where she is. But going back, it was the 9th of February of 2005. And what had happened was Maria hadn't turned up to her work, which was very unusual, hadn't rung to say, I'm not going to be here, I'm having a sick day or whatever. But it got to the point where she was supposed to pick up her son Damien from school. Maria was very regimented, would pick up Damien every day at, let's say, 3:30 from school. And on this particular day, the 9th of February, she didn't turn up to take Damien home. So the school rang Maria to say, where are you? And, of course, Maria's phone went through to message bank. So then they rang Joe. And Joe acted, obviously, very surprised. Oh, she should be there. So Joe says that he made a number of calls and tried to find Maria, just as an aside. But, of course, he went to Tanya's and they were sorting out their story. But he said that he'd been looking for her. Anyway, that night he went to the Craigieburn police station to report Maria as missing. Very, very concerned, a very concerned husband.
People are reported missing, every day in Australia. Did this missing person report ring alarm bells?
Well, it initially goes, he reported it at the Craigieburn police station. And generally when somebody goes missing, reports are taken. It's funny, the alarm bells, I believe, started the minute that Joe came in. The Craigieburn police, it's hard to explain, isn't it? But they just had this gut feeling that something wasn't right. It was very, very unusual for Maria not to pick up her son because her son was her world. It was very unusual for Maria not to go to work. So what happens is the police take the initial reports, they ask Joe all the questions, but then what happens is every reported person missing in Victoria goes on to our LEAP, the Victoria Police's system, it's called LEAP, the Law Enforcement Assistance Program. So it is put onto a system. And what happens is the missing persons unit, we have an analyst there, and the analyst monitors every reported missing person. And it's the analyst who picked that up and thought, there's something not right there. So the analyst does a couple of very quick checks, let's say telephone records and banking records. And Maria's touched nothing. So the analyst then does a couple of other things, but then the analyst, this is generally what happens, and I know this happened with this case, is the analyst went into the boss at Missing Persons Unit, Steve Waddell, and Helen says to Steve, I don't like this. I don't know if she used the term, but this is what we get, this smells. We can smell a rat. So Steve has a look at it, and then Steve pretty much decides there and then whether we're going to make a couple of inquiries. So somebody from Missing Persons rang Craigieburn Police, get a bit more information, and I think that's when, within hours, Steve has decided we're going to take it on. There's something not right here. So I know the next morning on the 10th of Feb, we all come into work and Steve says we're all going to Craigieburn. So we went to Craigieburn. We get a briefing by the Craigieburn police station, and by this stage, I believe, they had taken a statement from Joe, and that's very basic stuff. You know, you take a statement from the last person that saw her and just a bit of history, you know, about their marriage, about where Maria worked, who her friends were, where he thinks she could be, all that sort of stuff. And then it's decided we're taking it on, like it's going to, and it's not to say that the local police can't and the local detectives can't do it, but we have the resources, we have support services that are just at our fingertips, which the locals don't. But we generally would bring in a local as well, so that, because they know the local detectives, because they know the area back to front. So that's how that works.
So instead of being a detective that was linked to a local kind of police station, at the time you were a detective within the missing persons unit?
That's right.
So you're brought into the case. You've got Maria who is missing. You've got an initial statement from Joe. What's next? Because over the next 4 days, you're basically looking for Maria. An investigation is launched.
Correct. So what we do is, in a team, and there's a team of probably 4 or 5 detectives from the missing persons unit, plus maybe 1 or 2 from the local CI, the local criminal investigation branch. And so what happens is we all it's very much like CSI. There's a big whiteboard put up. So, Narelle, I want you to go and, speak to Maria's friends. Tim, I want you to go and go out with Joe to the house. Like, we all get our different tasks. And by this stage, we knew that Joe had, according to him, Joe had an affair with this woman called Tanya. And it had all finished, though. This is from Joe. It had all finished. But, you know, because he was asked, who do you think would, if something happened to Maria, who do you think might do this, something like this? And he said, well, the only person I can think of is the lady that I had an affair with.
So he threw her under the bus?
He put her under the bus the first opportunity he could get. So what happens is, I get the job, myself and a colleague, we get the job of going out and speaking to Tanya, finding out where she lives and going out and speaking to her. And going out and speaking to her, we were there within, I think it was probably the next day. I can remember when we went to the front door, she answered the door and she was very tall, very athletic, very accommodating, really sort of, I don't know if sweet's the right word, but really nice.
Mm.
Come in. But what we went with the information that Joe had said that, they'd had a bit of an affair. It had finished months ago. I don't know that he just didn't think we wouldn't go and speak to her. I don't know what he thought. But, of course, we go and speak to her and, we ask if we can sit down, something's happened, there's a woman missing, and she's, oh, really? We tell her that it's Maria Korp. Do you know Maria Korp? And she said, well, not really, but she's my partner's wife. It was something like that. Oh, can you tell us about your partner? It was, Gemma, it was like chalk and cheese.
So her story was that they were together?
Absolutely. Oh, not just together. They were Joe was organising a commitment ceremony. Joe had purchased this unit that she was staying in and paying the rent. And, it was all lovely and, they were going to live happily ever after.
It's an interesting decision by him, isn't it? Because, of course, you're going to be able to refute it.
That's right. And, of course, at this stage, we don't tell her that Joe's put her under the bus. Like I said, it was like chalk and cheese. It was Joe must have thought we'd come down the last shower or something. I don't know.
How did you find Joe? Did you interview him in those days?
No, I didn't have much to do with Joe. The informant in the matter, Tim Peck, and the boys in the crew, in the team, they spoke a lot to Joe. Yeah, I spoke to him a bit, but I found him, to be honest, and I feel bad saying this because I know that he has family, the kids are now adults, but I found him to be a narcissist, a womanizer. He thought he was God's gift to women, pathetic. Like, I just, he walked around with this strut like, I am shit hot. Sorry, but that's how it was. You know, those men that,
Yeah.
you know, and I know you want me, you know, that sort of person. And to be honest, I can understand, oh, God, in fact, I found him quite creepy in that sense, but I can understand he dressed really well. He spoke really nicely. He was very, oh, please, you go first, Narelle.
So he was chivalrous.
Very. And he dressed really well, really smart. But no, sorry, couldn't fool me, Joe.
So you obviously had these two stories from these two. Were they suspects at that point, or what were they?
The minute that Tanya told us it was the completely different story to Joe then, I mean, I don't know if I'd call them suspects at that point, but certainly persons of interest. There's quite a big difference. Joe is certainly, like, you start to think, what's going on here? Why is Joe saying this and Tanya's, you know, and for instance, we found out things like Joe never left. The concern was Joe, we know, and this is the next day, we know Joe hasn't left his work. He's been there from, say, 7 o'clock in the morning and he hasn't left until 5:30. So, and Tanya said that she'd met Joe for lunch in the car park, such a romantic, that he'd met her in the car park and they'd had lunch together. Joe doesn't tell us that. There's something like we needed to clarify this. And you start to wonder, why is Joe telling us all this bullshit, really? And we needed to find out. But no, I wouldn't say suspects, but certainly there's something we have to delve into here.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Gemma Bath. I'm speaking with former Victorian detective Narelle Fraser about the case of Maria Korp, the woman whose body was found in a car boot in 2005. Up next, Narelle recounts what happened on the day Maria was found. Within 4 days, that's when everything kind of changed with the investigation. Tell me about what happened on February 13th from your point of view.
We had put out a media release, or it was only a day or two later, a media release about the car. Anybody that sees this car may be part of an investigation. Can you ring Crime Stoppers if you find it? And on the 13th of February, it was a Sunday. I was working in the office, in the Missing Persons Unit office with another colleague. I can't remember who the colleague was. It was a man. And it was, 9 o'clock of a morning or something, and we get a call from D24 to say they found the car. The car was in Dallas Brooks Drive. It was Maria's car, the car we, put out a keep a lookout for. And it had been found by a shrine guard. So we rang the shrine guard and said, what have you got? He tells us this is the car. We said, please don't let anyone near it. Just wait where you are. Don't touch anything and we'll be there. And we were there in 5 minutes because we almost could have seen her car from our 8th floor office. It was amazing. So we raced down there and there's the car.
Because for people that don't know Melbourne, it's a really central spot. The Shrine of Remembrance is kind of in the centre, smack bang of the city.
Oh, yeah. And it's a busy thoroughfare, So where the car was parked legally, but from about, I would say, 80 metres away, there was a smell emanating from the car. And that smell, from a police person or detective's point of view, but it was the smell of death. We believed from the smell that there was something in that car, and we believed it was a person, a human.
80 metres is a long way away to already know that.
Oh, it was pungent. It was really strong. And so we put up some crime scene tape, and by this stage we've rung our bosses and everyone's coming from everywhere. But initially we didn't touch it. I looked in the front of the car and I think I saw a sandwich on the front seat, and it just looked like it had been – and the car was locked. No keys, it was locked. But there was condensation on the inside windows and that we couldn't see anyone. So, you just assume that there's something or someone in the boot. Oh, the smell. I'll never forget that smell. It was almost frightening, like concerning, thinking, oh, my God, there's a dead body in there. What's it going to be like? Because by this stage, the car, it was the hot February sun. It had clearly been there, a couple of days at least. Oh, my God.
So you were assuming that you were going to see a dead body. Going off that smell, you wouldn't think that anyone could survive that.
No. And in fact, when we opened up the boot, we probably opened up the boot within 10 or 15 minutes. We just had to be careful, obviously, to try and not contaminate the crime scene. But still, the first and foremost, we have to preserve life. So we have to if somebody's in there and alive, we've got to get in there. We open up the boot and, Gemma, the smell, that by this stage there's probably about, let's say, 8 detectives at the rear of the boot. And as they opened it up, it was like this wave of the foulest smell. But there's this little woman, like she was like a little tiny little woman. And she must have been, like, I don't know, not even 5 foot, like tiny. And she's in the sort of fetal position. She's right up against the back seats, if that makes sense.
So she was curled up kind of in the corner.
Yeah. And it was like, I can remember thinking, oh, God, that must be Maria. And I can remember somebody saying, we've got to get in, make sure she's, check her signs of life. And I think it was my sergeant, Rocky, Shane Brundell, that said, oh, somebody's going to get in there. By this stage, I recall probably about 2 detectives. One was throwing up in the gutter and another one had fainted.
Oh, my gosh. It was that bad.
Oh, yeah.
But you got in that boot, Narelle.
No, I know that, but and this isn't about it's about a normal human reaction to see this woman helpless, hopeless, like just like a frightened little animal, sort of. That's and I just really, all I wanted to do was get in there and like comfort her, thinking she was dead, I know, but she's somebody's mum. She's, like she's a human being. I mean, I didn't even think about it. I just got in the boot and I sort of manoeuvred myself. The smell, I didn't even smell it. Isn't it funny, Gemma? I didn't smell the smell.
You're in police mode.
Well, I just wanted to get in there and, I don't know, do something, So I sort of manoeuvred myself like I almost spooned her, because what I was trying to do was confirm that she was deceased, because she certainly looked deceased. And just going back to what she looked like, so she was very dishevelled. So I remember her top being sort of up around her bra area, and her pants were sort of just skewiffed, and I didn't think for 1 minute that she had been sexually assaulted or anything. It was a look like she was just dishevelled, like she'd just been thrown in there. That's how it looked to me, and pushed back sort of. And so I checked her signs of life, and I tried to check her wrists and around her neck, and that's when I saw these ligature marks. It looks like she'd been strangled around her neck, but also she was decomposing. well, I couldn't find any signs of life. In fact, I thought she was dead. But she was decomposing, and by that I mean that it was pretty horrific. She had maggots in her ears, maggots in her nose, and I've got a feeling she was being eaten. And I couldn't find any signs of life. And then just on a bit of a whim, I just wanted to check 110%. So somehow I manoeuvred myself so that I could see her chest. I put my head near her chest. Chest moved. I could not believe it. And I remember just yelling, "Oh, my God, she's alive. She's alive." So, everyone rallies round into action. And Rocky, I can remember Rocky, "Just stay with her, Narelle, stay there." Oh, I mean, he wasn't ordering me. I'm just saying it was just amazing that she was still alive. And so an ambulance was there within minutes, I reckon. But I remember while we were waiting, all this commotion is happening outside, but I laid with her, and I remember stroking her hand and holding her hand. And I remember I just spoke to her and I said, "I don't know if you can hear me, Maria, but you're safe now. Nobody will ever hurt you. I won't let you go."
To think what she went through in that boot, if she was conscious for any of it, is just harrowing. So to know that you were the first one in there is comforting in some respects.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to comfort her and assure her that, nobody would hurt her anymore, that, I would protect her. That's all I wanted her to hear.
So obviously she's raced to hospital from the boot. Did you go with her?
Oh, yeah. Rocky said not to leave her side, and I wouldn't anyway, but Rocky said don't leave her side. And he said I think he gave me a pen and a bit of paper or something, but he said, whatever she says, if she says anything, make sure you write it down. And so when the ambulance came, I kept holding her hand, like I didn't let her hand go. When they put her on the trolley, I still kept holding her hand and I said, "I'm still here, Maria." And then we got in the back of the ambulance, and I remember, and the ambulance were great. They, let me hold her hand. And I remember a couple of times we stopped in between Dallas Brooks Drive, where the car was, and the Alfred is only about 2 kilometres along St Kilda Road. But I remember twice the ambos stopped because they thought that she had died. And they were putting some sort of a line, like something in her feet. I couldn't get her. I've never seen anything like that. But apparently that was, I don't know, it's more direct, or I don't know what it was. But, yeah, I can always remember them saying, "I think we've lost her," and doing something. It was trying, obviously, to keep her alive. But when we got to the hospital, everyone there obviously were waiting for us. They knew who we were and everything. And it was like the hospital just cleared for us to get Maria in and into an operating theatre. But the thing, I was really offended, and I know this man had a job, but there was this orderly and he followed us down the hallway into the operating theatre. He never let us out of his sight, and all the way he was spraying this air freshener. And I just thought, I don't know, can you just give her a bit of dignity?
Why? I assume, is that for the patients so that they didn't smell it?
Yeah. The smell was horrendous. It was horrendous. And I thought, that's what I mean. I understand. And he must have been given directions from a boss or something. But I just sort of thought, really? Anyway, but when we get into the operating theatre, of course, they've got everything ready to go, and they had to take off her clothes. So I had a bag, an evidence bag. They must have had one in the room. But anyway, I just put her clothes in there, and then that's when they said, "Off you go." So I went out of the room, and I don't really remember. Isn't that funny? I mean, but I don't remember much more about that day other than smelling terribly, like my clothes stank. But it's something I will never, ever forget. And I just seeing her like she was, I thought, how could anybody do this to a human being? Like just to leave them unconscious in the boot of a car in the hot sun. How could somebody do that? And as we found out later, it was Tanya.
Yeah.
That lovely woman I saw at the front door.
Which we'll get to how that all unravelled. But basically, once doctors properly examined Maria, along with the attack injuries, the bruising, the head injuries, you mentioned the ligatures around the neck, she also had severe oxygen deprivation and dehydration, obviously from being left in that boot for all those days. And the decision was made to place her in a medically induced coma. So she never actually regained consciousness or spoke, did she?
No, never. In fact, she was in hospital for 6 months, never regained consciousness. But the legal issues that, just putting the investigation aside for a moment, the legal issues, I'll just run through a few of them for you. Because Maria couldn't speak, obviously, because Joe by this stage absolutely was a suspect, we didn't know much more, so VOCAT appointed as her guardian, let's say. That was a man by the name of Julian Gardner. Also, Laura, the daughter, she was granted permission to take over Maria's financial affairs because they discovered that $4,000 had been taken from Maria's account, I think the day before she went missing. Then Maria's guardian, Julian Gardner, he made a decision to cease all medical treatment because he had been advised that there was no hope of any recovery. So also the fact that when Maria she was clearly going to die from all accounts. So then, of course, somebody would be facing a murder charge, right? Margaret Teague, who was the president of the Right to Life Australia, they were considering legal action to overturn Julia Gardner's decision to have Maria's feeding tube reinserted. So there's all these legal issues. And after the decision by Mr. Gardner about that they were going to remove the feeding tube because that's all that was keeping her alive, Joe successfully applied to vary his bail conditions so that he could go and say goodbye to Maria. Yeah, and that was agreed upon. It went, like the right to life people, it just became very, very complicated.
What was their argument, that it was inhumane?
Yep.
Because the doctors
they were
said
starving her. Basically, I believe, I mean, this isn't my forte, but I believe that they thought that by taking out that feeding tube that she would starve to death.
Right.
And they felt that, I think that is their general belief, is that everyone has a right to stay alive as long as they can. But other people had made decisions and they didn't agree with it.
Once Maria's body was found, she's taken to hospital, she's placed into a coma. What happens next in terms of the investigation? Are you back at Joe's door?
Absolutely. Virtually knocking it down.
Mm.
Yeah. Actually, going back the day that we found Maria on that 13th of Feb, I remember there was quite a discussion at the back of the car about that Joe needed to be told. And there was a number of detectives that wanted to go and see Joe and tell him because they wanted to look at his reaction, because I think obviously by this stage we believe Joe is involved. We don't know how much, but there's, so many loose ends. But I know there was quite a few hands going up saying, could I go and break the news to Joe? Because they just wanted to see his face. obviously, they felt that he was right in it, but he hadn't actually done the act, but we believe he was behind it.
Next, Narelle explains exactly how Joe convinced his mistress, Tanya, to kill his wife. How did you get to the bottom of what happened? How did you work out that it was Tanya?
Because Tanya told us.
Right.
So when Maria was found, we went around to Tanya's, and I think Tanya must have, by this stage, we'd told her that Joe had told us a completely different story and that he had pulled the wool over her eyes. And I think I know we told her, he's put you under the bus. And that's when she thought, pardon me, well, fuck you.
Mm.
So that's when she said, I'll tell you everything. And without Tanya's cooperation, it would have been difficult. But I remember when we told her she was under arrest and she said, can I just go and tell my parents? Remembering that she's got a little 9-year-old girl, 8 or 9-year-old girl, and she had to take her little girl around to her parents' place so that they could look after her because we had to go and interview her. And I can remember she said, I just want to tell my parents, and would you allow me to tell them without going in with me in handcuffs? And the decision was made, pretty risky, I think, looking back. But we believed that Tanya, she had become, she was helping us. And there's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And so we agreed that we'd take off the handcuffs while she walked into her parents' place and told them. And I can remember we just sort of stood outside the lounge room door. Yeah, and she told her parents. I remember seeing her with a little girl on her lap, telling her parents. Like, you just can't imagine, can you?
I mean, I know she's the one that did the wrong thing, but just thinking about that conversation, those parents that had to listen to that, it's a lot. What did she tell you? What did Tanya say happened to Maria?
She told us that Joe was everything that she'd wished for. In fact, she said a number of times, he is my world, and that she was passionately in love with him, that he showered her with gifts, with support, with money, with a house, that he was promising that they would, live together forever. And he started to talk about, how am I going to get rid of Maria? And initially, she thought he was joking. They then started talking. I remember one time Tanya said that they went around to her brothers and they started talking about, if you were going to kill somebody, what would be the best way to kill somebody? And her brother, Tanya's brother, goes, with a belt, like you just strangle them. This was a very off-the-cuff conversation, right? And anyway, then Joe started to talk to Tanya about, the only way we can be together is if we do kill Maria.
What do you mean? Like, why wouldn't you just leave her?
Why wouldn't you have the courage? Yes, it's a difficult conversation, but why wouldn't Joe do what any other man or any other person that's had an affair, and there's a lot in this world, why wouldn't you just say, look, I've fallen in love, or I want to be with somebody else, I don't love you anymore? But no, not Joe. So Joe had manipulated Tanya, in my belief. He was controlling, he was coercive, he was promising her the world. And look, Tanya believed him. And so they start discussing. Joe says, well, look, I'll get together a kit, I'll get you a balaclava, I'll get you. So he got the murder kit together, and he decided that what he'd do was, he said, you be ready at 6:30 in the morning. I'll come and get you. I'll put you in the back of Maria's car. I'll just go upstairs and, get ready for work or whatever. So I think at like 5 o'clock or something, he went and got Tanya. He'd got her a pair of shoes. like to commit the murder in. And he said something like, I don't want that bitch coming out of the garage alive. That's what he said to Tanya. Don't have her come out alive. But Tanya agreed.
I know.
So
all of it is quite hard to believe, that one, he came up with this, two, she agreed to it, it's just mind-blowing.
It is. It is unbelievable. But also that's what she was prepared to do for love. I think, my God, how skewed is that? Oh, anyway, so he comes and gets her at 5 o'clock or whatever. She puts on the balaclava. He puts her in the back of the car, and he says Marie will be down about 6:30 and she'll go off to work. So she had the belt, which is what the brother had suggested. She had the belt in the back of the car. She was all ready. Maria comes down, gets into the driver's seat, and she's behind her, garrots her with the belt, strangles her. But apparently little Maria put up a hell of a fight, but eventually she went limp. So Tanya then drags her around and puts her in the boot. And Tanya can recall driving. She just wasn't sure where to drive, so she just drove to Dallas Brooks Drive and just left her there. But she remembers hearing Maria gasping in the back. Anyway, she just left her, ran. She was an athlete. So she then has the car keys. She runs to her brother's work and tells her brother, I've just strangled Maria. Anyway, so she then goes back home because she'd given her little girl a Panadol to make sure she slept. And she gets home and wakes up her little girl, takes her to school, makes some lunch and goes and meets Joe in the car park of Joe's work. And that's when Joe says you've got to go and burn all the clothing, burn everything. So she does. She goes, I don't know, up the hill somewhere and burns it all and comes back and everything's what could possibly go wrong.
To think they thought they'd get away with that as well.
Yeah, I know.
So she pled guilty. She became a prosecution witness.
Yep.
She ended up getting 12 years, 9 years non-parole, so she's already out.
Yes.
What about Joe? He did not plead guilty, did he?
Oh, no. Joe was going to fight it all the way because, of course, it was Tanya.
Mm-hmm.
She was doing it, not him. Yeah. Oh, it got very complicated, but in the end, Joe got to see Maria when they pulled the tubes out, and Joe was on bail by this stage for, I think it was attempted murder, as was Tanya, and he wanted to go and see her, so he did, but then she died about a week after the tubes had been removed, and she died, and her funeral was, I think it was about August. On the day of her funeral, Joe ended his life as well.
In quite dramatic fashion as well. He kind of told people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he rang a journalist to say, this is what I'm going to do. I think he left a note. But, yeah, he ended his life at his home. But I just sort of think he wouldn't even let Maria die in peace. He just... Yeah. And the sad thing, well, there's so many sad parts of this, but so Laura's lost her mum and her stepfather, but Damien, the little boy, he's lost his parents, both of them, plus Tanya's daughter. Tanya went inside for, I think she did 9 years. So she lost her mum as well in a way.
All these children that are affected.
Oh, and all that Joe needed to do was, have the balls to say, I don't love you anymore,
We live in a country where divorce is legal.
Yeah.
You're allowed to leave.
You're right.
This has been one of those cases that has captivated public attention. It's been turned into a book, a TV movie, an opera, I found out through my research.
I mean, that's offensive, isn't it?
It is.
An opera.
It is a case that, I think because it's got so many elements. It's, the affair, the fact that she was alive. It's fodder for a lot of that kind of
Yeah.
consumption.
Yeah.
What do you make of the cultural kind of pop culture adaptations of the story?
It's a bit hard to criticise people because I talk about it in a presentation. So I feel a bit conflicted in a way. I find the opera, I find that offensive, but I feel like because I was there, it's a little bit different, and I feel like I'm very understanding that there are people out there that it is going to trigger and affect, and I feel like I do it pretty gently, but also I think you'd call it like lived experience. I was there.
It's
not
very,
like
very different to creating art out of, a murder story.
Yeah. So I do feel a bit conflicted, but also I think there's a lot of lessons, let's say, to be learned, particularly with what I say about, and I haven't mentioned this, but Maria had an intervention order out on Joe at one point because she was worried that he was going to do something. He'd become very, I don't know about violent, but she was very unsettled around Joe, and she went and got an intervention order. And would you believe that the day before she went missing, she took the intervention order off with Joe. Joe was insisting, come on, we don't need this intervention order. I'll be good. I won't hurt, all that sort of stuff. Again, manipulative, controlling, coercive. So they went together to the court and removed the intervention order.
That's so interesting because it shows that she had a level of kind of fear prior.
Yeah. And my point to that is how important it is when you are concerned about somebody to go to the police, and if the police take out the intervention order, in this instance, if the police would have taken out the intervention order, they wouldn't have allowed it to lapse. Joe and Maria would have had to convince the police, we need it removed because of blah, blah, blah.
But I would argue that there are so many cases of murder when there are intervention orders in place anyway. So would that have made a difference?
Probably. No, probably not. But I suppose in my conflict of telling the story, I have a message about how important it is when you are frightened, in fear of your life or in fear of violence or whatever. It's important to, number one, tell the police, and the police should, if they're doing their job properly, they should, if they feel there's genuine fears, they should take out the intervention order, not the person that is in fear, because it's so difficult to remove that order once the police have put it in place because they have to agree to it. I think that's a message that people can be manipulated to think, I'll remove it because the danger period's over. It's better than nothing. People say, it's just a piece of paper. It is just a piece of paper. However, it gives the police a power of arrest.
Yeah.
It gives the police some powers. I think intervention orders are a very important part of the justice system and family violence, people that are concerned. It is just a piece of paper, but it's powerful.
You've been very open about talking about the cumulative effects of the job of policing, of being a detective, and how it can affect your mental health. Is Maria's case one that has stayed with you, that has affected you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it has, because I could, explaining to you about how I found Maria, I can see it all. I can remember the smell. I can remember the emotion of how could somebody do this to anybody else. I can remember, comforting her and how good it felt sort of to be able to help Maria in the worst time of her life. And maybe I remember all those things. That sort of stuff, you don't generally see decomposing bodies and finding that they're alive. Like that's really unusual, and you don't forget those sort of things. And to think it's somebody's mother, like just such an innocent person. All she wanted to do was please Joe, and all he could think about was murdering her. Like, just what some people do. Never ceases to amaze me.
No, and like you say, your visceral kind of retelling shows how much it kind of has stayed with you.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has been 20 years this year since Maria's murder. What do you want listeners to take away from revisiting her case, 2 decades on?
To never forget her. To trust your instincts. If you think something isn't right, doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. I think it's important that if you're in a situation where you're concerned for your safety, tell somebody, write down, make some sort of note somewhere, tell people, just so that if something does happen, somebody might be able to corroborate, if something really bad happens and the person is murdered, that it might help find, the perpetrator and have, I was going to say him because generally it is.
Statistically.
Yeah. Oh, and there's another avenue we could go down. But in the end, it's statistically men commit the majority of these sort of offences. And also for the men that are angry or they feel like they're losing control, go and get some help, go and speak to somebody. It all comes back to speaking to someone like Joe. Just talk to somebody, tell somebody. I've had enough of my wife, I want to go off with my mistress. I don't know, just talk.
Just leave.
Just leave.
Thanks to Narelle for assisting us to tell this story. True Crime Conversations is a Mamamia podcast hosted and produced by me, Gemma Barth, and Tali Blackman, with audio design by Jacob Round. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. Your feedback means so much to us. One easy way to share your thoughts is by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Just scroll down to the bottom of your podcast page, click write a review and add a star rating. You can also contact us direct at truecrime@mamamia.com.au. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.